Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Talking Landscape episode number 94. We're getting closer and closer to 100, and I don't think we've planned what we're going to do on our 100th show, but hopefully it'll be something pretty cool. Welcome, and tonight we are looking at the new book by wilderness photographer Martin Hawes. The book is called Unexplored, and we're going to be exploring a lot of the concept ideas for the book, the practicalities of getting the book together, and some of the other ideas and trials and tribulations of putting together a beautiful coffee table book that's nearly on hand. And I've had the privilege of seeing a PDF copy of the book. I haven't seen it, the hard copy yet, which is still a week or so away, but I'm really looking forward to it, and it's going to be a wonderful book. So I'd like to welcome our co-host Luke and our guest Martin to the show. Evening, gentlemen.
Thanks very much, Nick. Yeah.
Yes. We don't have Paul tonight. He's still over in the land of the large white sheep, also known as New Zealand, but he'll be back in the country in the next few days. So no doubt he'll be back for the next show after that, but I believe he's having a great time over there, exploring, doing some photography from helicopters and looking at glaciers and judging for photo competitions and all sorts of things. So no doubt he'll have a fair bit to tell us when he gets back. But Luke,
I think he's on. He's flying at the moment to Melbourne and going to be part of the photography awards that they're having over there at the moment. So I think he's a judge and a speaker for that event, and then I think he's back home next week. So I haven't seen him for ages, so looking forward to that.
So he's nearly back in the country. Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, I know. I think they're letting him back in, which is a real surprise.
Yeah, look, I was surprised too. Yeah. But anyway, he'll be right. He'll be right.
Yeah, that's right.
Luke, you've been up to a fair bit in the last couple of weeks. What sort of things have you been up to?
Oh, I've just been moving house. Unfortunately, I had to move house, which is always a pain in the butt. So finally got in and able to set up my desk today so I could do this show. And then it's my birthday on Friday, actually. So I'm actually flying to Flinders Island, which I've got behind me here, and I'm really looking forward to a week over there, just relaxing. And I think I've been working pretty flat out lately, and it will be really nice to have a bit of a break and some time over there. It's definitely one of my favorite places in the world, so it'll be really lovely to be able to get some beautiful seascapes and landscapes over there.
Yeah, I can certainly confirm that when Luke has to set his computer up, it's a marathon, and he has a real cord spaghetti thing going on. But I'm glad you got there in the end, mate.
It's pretty full on, but it's all necessary. And one thing I have to recommend to everyone is a stand-up desk. I recently changed over to one, and I just can't get enough of it at the moment. So I've even set it up. So if I put the desk up, all I have to do is start going like this at the same time, and you wouldn't even know I'm going from sitting to standing, which is pretty handy. But definitely good to have these little bits and pieces that make our life easier and better for the body as well.
Very trendy in offices around Australia. So you've joined the crowd. Look, well done.
Absolutely.
I've had a bit on. I apologise, I haven't been on the last couple of shows. One thing Luke and I did do on the weekend is we went to the premiere of the movie Franklin, which was the show a couple of weeks ago with director Oliver Cassidy. And what an absolute brilliant documentary it is. It is just superb. I'll even go as far as saying it's a masterpiece. I reckon it's brilliant. And I hadn't had a chance to watch the interview that you did with him, you and Paul did with him, Luke, which... I'm definitely going to go back and watch and get some of the behind the scenes thing, but my goodness, it is a beautiful documentary. It runs about 90 minutes or so.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely entranced the whole time. It was just brilliant. You haven't been along to see it, Martin, yet?
No, I haven't. The nearest I've come to it was I met the crew at the Arenibus.
That's right. That's right. I remember that. The Arenibus.
And they came with about 7 large watercraft piled high with about 48 tons of serious video equipment, underwater drones, and goodness knows what else.
Yeah, it was amazing to come straight through the Orinoco, and then, you know, after not seeing anyone the whole time, there's a guy just standing on the top of the cliff there, taking a photo straight down. I was like, well, that's a bit different. And so yeah, no, it was lovely to bump into you there. And don't think we'd actually, I think that was the first time we'd met when we did that. But yeah, no, that was a special time on the river, and really, yeah, glad to check that movie out. And one other thing that happened on the weekend was Nick's gallery exhibition launch, which was I managed to arrive just after his speech, which was perfect timing. And
oh yes, well done, mate.
But it's an absolutely gorgeous exhibition. 3 different photographers, Luke O'Brien, who we've had on, Tristan Stewart, and also the illustrious Nick Monk. And I think it's very well worth seeing if you are in Hobart. It's at the Wild Island Gallery in Salamanca, and Nick's prints look absolutely glorious as always. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. It was it's a really nice exhibition that's focused on mainly sort of wilderness style photography, and I've only got 6 prints up there, but they're either 24 inches or 30, or I've got one 36-inch print, so they're quite nice in size. And we're invited along by Rob Blakers to exhibit, and funnily enough, I'd never met Tristan before, and I hadn't met Tristan until the day of the actual exhibition opening, which was a bit of a blowout. But because our lives are so complicated and busy, Tristan had gone off and got himself married in the month before the exhibition happened, and was off on his honeymoon. So we gave him a leave pass for that, and he's a lovely, lovely guy. And of course, we've had Luke on the show, and he's a lovely guy too. And both their prints look great. So it was really nice of Rob to invite us to exhibit at Wild Island, and that's on until the end of September. It's free to go into Wild Island for a look. So please, if you're in Salamanca, pop down and have a look at the exhibition, and let me know what you thought of it. That'd be terrific. Well, we better get on with this show, and I'll introduce Martin properly. We've already had a chat to him, but Martin's been on the show before. Martin was on episode 57, and it was basically talking about wilderness photography and Martin's adventures out there, and some of the things that he does to get to the places that most of us will never see, which is sad, but it's also comforting to know that the places are out there and being looked after by nature itself without too many people to trample on it. But Martin first published a book in 1981 called Above Me, Only Sky, which we did talk about on show 57. And it's certainly worthwhile, if you want to hear more from Martin, getting back to episode 57 for a look. And I guess we'll explore some of those similar themes tonight with you, Martin. But I think the main thing that we'll talk about in general, and the conversation will flow in whatever direction it flows. But the book's concept, the journey it took just to get the thing published, the design, ideas and concepts, some of your I don't know, ethics or morals related to what you put in the book, and marrying with what you practice with your wilderness photography, etc. And we probably talked about it in the last show, but one of Martin's great other talents is writing. And although this book isn't nearly as text heavy as Above Me, Only Sky, the pieces of writing that are in there are just inspiring for any landscape or wilderness photographer to read about. Some of the trips that Martin has been on. Indeed, I'd say most of the trips that Martin embarks on are quite harrowing to read about. And he certainly works very, very hard for the images that he gets. So welcome, Martin, and look forward to hearing more about this book.
Right. Where do you want to start?
You want to start? Well, I guess you sent me a lovely plan of things to talk about, but I guess start from the start. What made you decide to publish another book of your wilderness photography? I mean, we're talking over 40 years since the last book, and it's quite a remarkable time frame between books to publish.
Well, briefly, two things. At the beginning, as we all know, 2020 was a year when everything fell apart. I was all set to go overseas for 6 months in 2020. And I sort of was really seeing it as a way to find a new direction in life. For a number of reasons, which I needn't go into now, I felt that I was kind of getting really kind of almost run out of track, and felt that 6 months overseas would open up some new vistas in my life. And I had my tickets all bought, and then COVID came along and everything fell out. So plan B was just back to normal. So that was thing number one, which I think was part of the impetus. But okay, well, what am I going to do with this time now? And a book. I mean, I'd been thinking about a book for some years, and so a book was definitely a possibility. But the other thing is, I owe it to a person. I won't name them here. That, but it was a person I'd never come across before. I had no idea who they were, but they knew of my work, and they sent me an email and basically said, I appreciate your work. I think you should do a book before you drop dead. And more or less in those words. And they gave an example of a photographer who had in fact dropped dead before they got around to doing a book that they were working on. And it was logic that I couldn't argue with. And I thought, yeah, it's got a point. So I made this person pay for their audacity, but they were one of the people I sent the first draft to. I said, okay, fine. If that's the way you feel about my work, here's the first draft. What do you think of this? I sent it out to 3 people, and so everything started to roll on from there.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually intrigued, Martin, where you'd planned to go overseas. Just for someone that's such an adventurer as yourself, is it something you're willing to share?
Well, yeah. It's a bit of a long story, but the main impetus was that Grant Dixon and I were both going to attend and present papers at the World Wilderness Congress in Jaipur.
Wow.
And so my feeling was, well, if I'm going to get that far, I may as well keep going. I wanted to return to the UK to revisit a school where I had worked in the late 90s, which I'd still have connections to, and I have a great deal of connection with. I think it's a very, very special place. Yeah. And I wanted to go back to Russia, which I'd already visited twice, to the Caucasus Mountains, which is a stupendously beautiful place. And I mean, the Caucasus struck me as being the sort of place Switzerland might have been 10,000 years ago. Wow. The stupendous beauty of Northern Hemisphere Alps with almost no development. Like huge areas of essentially undeveloped country, or very, very low development. It is an extraordinary place, and I have a very good friend from that area as well. So I was planning to spend several months in Russia and also visit Georgia next door as well. So it was going to be one heck of a trip.
So Russia's kind of off the
well
again.
to say the least.
Oh dear.
I mean, I can't entirely rule out, but I mean, my chances of getting back to Russia anytime soon are obviously, as good close to zero as one can get, most unfortunately.
So someone really wanted you to do a book. That's basically what happened.
Yeah, it seems that the fate conspired to make sure the book was going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad someone put it in writing to you, because I'm sure plenty of us were thinking it, and I'm a big one for going up to photographers and saying, when are you going to bring out your next book? And trying to encourage them to do it. There's a couple of other photographers I've been trying to encourage for a couple of years or a few years to put out a book, but I'm so pleased that you're putting out another one, because I really, really enjoyed. I've got lots of Tasmanian photography books, but one of my absolute favourites, and I'm not just saying this because you're on the show, but Above Me Only Sky really is a wonderful book, and a fantastic piece of Tasmaniana, I suppose, would be the good way of saying it. So I'm very excited to see this book when it comes out. And just explain a little bit more about what happened from that moment of concept and first draft, and what sort of decisions you're making to get the book up and running.
Well, maybe what you learned from the first book and what you could apply to this one as well.
Yeah.
Well, one thing is, I decided, I think pretty much at the start, I was going to self-publish, because I wanted, as complete freedom in terms of the design and content. And in any case, I felt that there was really zero chance of finding a publisher who would be willing to do it, given the extreme marginality of the economic side. And basically, it was, I had the financial ability to self-publish, and so it was an easy decision to make. This is my fourth book, but it's the first one that I self-published, so that was a learning curve. And I will sing the praises of Grant Dixon. I mean, Grant and I are very good friends. Go back many decades. But you've had Grant on your show, and Grant did his wonderful book Winter Light in 2020, and he self-published that. And he's self-publishing another book which is coming out very soon. And so it could, in the real world, one could easily imagine that there might be rivalry between us. But fortunately, neither of us, have a bar of that. And Grant's been unstinting with his advice and information about the pitfalls and signposts on the road to self-publishing. And so, in many ways, I've been stepping in his footsteps and riding in his slipstream all the way. It's been, enormously helpful. Because I was, fairly clueless. and I'm
sure Grant's done the same with some of the other legends of wilderness photography as well, in terms of how he got his info. So it's all being passed down.
Well, I think, we are a collective more than, we're not at each other's throats. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I mean, I think, I've never had the slightest interest in competition, certainly not in photography. And, because it just seems to me to be so distasteful and destructive and unnecessary. And so, and we are all doing valuable work in different ways. And there's no need for any kind of sense of competition, let alone actual competition. So, I think it's very healthy that we're helping each other out, because it's to our mutual benefit, and because ultimately it's to the benefit of the bush that we all are so deeply in love with.
Absolutely.
No, that's definitely a good philosophy. Is the book something that you're hoping to make some income from, or are you hoping to more just pay for it? If you know what I mean. I know some of the financial questions that you have to ask yourself when you self-publish these sort of things. So where does it sit for you in general?
I'm expecting to lose money, but hoping not to lose very much. I mean, it really, basically, I set myself up to sell as much as I could online directly to people, because the moment I sell through retailers, I'm not making any money. And that is obviously partly a product of the fact it's a relatively small print run, which is really inescapable. I mean, unless, in the unlikely event the book sort of becomes some kind of a bestseller, it's going to be sold mainly in Tasmania and to people obviously who are familiar with the Tasmanian wilderness, which is a relatively small market. And so the cost per unit is high. And retailers take 40% of recommended retail. So basically that wipes out, your advantage and forget about getting a distributor. Unless you're prepared to drive all the way around Australia yourself, going to shops for the rest of your life, it's not going to happen. So I do make some money out of selling directly to people. So I'd already done some groundwork even before I decided to do a book. I'd done, as you probably know, considerable groundwork in Facebook, particularly getting my work known to a reasonably large audience. And that was really specifically with the intention that when the time came to do a book, there would be a readership there who would at least know about it and who I could reach. And basically, I'd say that that effort paid off. I mean, it's been quite successful. I did build up a significant number of people who are familiar with my work and could be. I could communicate relatively easily to that the book was happening, get them interested. And I have done reasonably well in terms of pre-publication sales. In fact, I mean, given that a pre-publication sale is selling something that people haven't seen, it's a big ask, to fork out. I mean, I'm selling them for $85 pre-publication rate. And, it's a big ask to ask people to get people to part with $85 for something they haven't seen. It requires them to have a substantial amount of faith in your work. And in the quality of what you do, and so given that, I've done probably not as well as I might have hoped, from terms of profit, but I think I've done very well. And of course, the next question is how well it sells when people can actually see it in a shop or see it on a friend's shelf. And I mean, yeah, once again, I'm fairly confident that I'm confident that I will sell this print run anyway.
Are you? Is it something that you generally post around Australia for an extra?
Yes, I'm going. I mean, already quite a lot of the sales are from people on the mainland, and once it'll be in the shops in Tasmania within a few weeks, quite soon. And once it is, I'll continue to sell it online by postage only. So that presumably, I mean, there may be some people in northern Tasmania or in remote places in Tasmania who will still want to buy it directly from me via post. But I would imagine then most of the people who buy it will be people on the mainland.
Just to clear up for anyone that's watching, because we do have a small international audience, is it something that you could post internationally? I know the cost would be high and people would expect to pay that postage, but is it something you're willing to look at, or are you not doing that?
No question. Yeah, absolutely. I'm more than happy to. I mean, I say on the website, warn people that international postage is pretty terrifyingly high. I mean, it's, I don't know, I haven't actually priced it. It depends which country, of course, but it would be a substantial proportion of the cost of the book. But if people are willing to pay that, certainly. And of course, I mean, the other thing is, that if you're sending over a bulk, there's 3 or 4 people, then the cost postage per unit does substantially decrease as well.
Yeah, that's good. I know there's probably a few people out there that would be willing to go on our recommendation that this is going to be a fantastic book. And if anyone is interested in seeing true wilderness of Tasmania, then it's something that we'll heartily recommend. And just so I don't forget later, in the show notes, we do have a link to Martin's website where you can buy the book directly. So I'm sure we'll mention it again during the show, but if not, it's in the show notes. And just what is it for people that don't want to look up the show notes, Martin? What's the address?
Well, the bit.ly address is Unexplored Tas. So bit.ly/Unexplored Tas, all one word, is the easiest way to remember it.
Yeah, terrific. So let's talk about some of the concepts of design. How did you go about the graphic design? Who did you get that done through, and what were their ideas? Did they marry with yours? And were there recommendations put to you that you adopted and other ones that you didn't adopt? Or talk us through some of that stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's an interesting top question. And just to begin with, first of all, recognizing the fact that Tasmania has produced some amazing books already, wilderness photography books. It's got this extraordinary lineage of outstanding wilderness photography books, which is kind of daunting in a way, but it's also a great challenge, right? If you're going to do a book, you want to do the very best you can. You want to do something which at least doesn't sort of set the clock back. It's not a question of bettering what's happened in the past, because there's been immaculate work done in the past, but also the question whether you can do something different, whether you can take it in a new direction, and of course that that question affects your photography as much as a book. So that's sort of in the background. I had probably the best decision I made was, okay, I need a graphic designer. And anyone who is considering even thinking about a book of good photographs, unless you're a brilliant graphic designer, get a brilliant graphic designer. It's absolutely crucial. Don't pretend that you know more than you do. I mean, design in a book is critical, but there's the critical difference between a book being quite good and being fabulous, or being unique even. And the other thing was, you know, I mean, just perhaps stating the obvious, a book is not just a gallery of photographs. I mean, it's not just a bunch of photographs printed in physical form on paper and bound. You know, that's the sort of simplest concept of a book. But rather, a book is potentially a work of art in its own right. It's greater than the sum of its parts. It's greater than the photographs, and it's greater than text. I mean, you know, there's all of these elements coming in. Obviously, I mean, it was clear to me that the book was going to be primarily photographic, and for that reason, I felt from the start the text needed to be brief. Because, I mean, generally speaking, if people buy a photographic book, they don't want to read a lot of text, and many people don't. In fact, I don't.
I was going to ask you about that actually, because you're a brilliant writer, and so it must have, even though you had that decision, it must have still been quite difficult perhaps to not include more information.
It wasn't difficult for me. I think it's difficult for everybody else, because everybody's, you know, like people are saying they love what I write on Facebook and they love these stories and stuff like that, and why don't you write more? And I think everyone's going to be disappointed.
Because, well, I mean, let's be honest, Martin. You could have just taken all your Facebook posts for the last 3 years and just mashed them into a book, and everyone would be really happy, because your stories are extraordinary and they're just so beautifully written.
Well, thanks, mate. Well, that might be another book. I mean, you know, seriously, something along those lines. I mean, several people have said they would like a book of ordinary stories, and maybe that will be it. With, you know, with the photographs will be play a much smaller role. For one reason or another, perhaps, you know, I just felt this book, I wanted to do a photographic book, and the photographs were going to be the primary subject matter. But having said that, I also definitely wanted to include text. And although the text is sparse, I personally feel that it is a very important part of the book. It's an important part of what this book is saying. You know, and I say some things which perhaps the photographs are saying subliminally, but it's saying in words. So that was in my mind. So I went to, I mean, I only knew one graphic designer who works with books, essentially, and that's Linda Warner. And she did Grant's Winterlight book, and she's done many of the great works of Tasmanian Wilderness Photography, Chris Bell's, many other stupendous books. And I had one reservation about going to her, which was that, and this is probably a little bit crazy, but you know, to put it sort of in a rather weird way, it was almost like her work was too perfect. And what I mean by that is that the kind of style of books that she'd been doing, you know, you open a double-page spread, and you know, there's a photograph immaculately framed, and there's a page number, you know, immaculately placed in immaculate font, and there's a bit of text over here, you know, immaculately blah blah blah, and there's a you know, in a sense, I wanted that, because what that tells the reader, you know, the viewer, is that there's a sense of reverence for the subject matter, which is important. But I also felt that there's a danger of that becoming almost too clean and sepulchral, if that's the right word. And almost to the point where it's taming the very thing that you're putting on the page. That, you know, it's kind of sacrificing it, you know, making it almost untouchable. And what I wanted to do, it took me a while to work out what I wanted to convey in this book, but eventually I realized that what I wanted to express in the book was two things, and one was the sublimity, the sublimeness of the wilderness, the ineffable peace and the immense beauty, and that which one stands before wordless in awe. And at the same time, I wanted to convey the wildness of the place, which is the savagery of it, the brutality of it, even, the bitter hardship of bashing through that scrub, and the extreme discomfort of the rains and getting flooded out in the tent, and all of that. Now, so I wanted to, and my question was, how can I bring those two things together? Can I do both, and how can the book do that? How can the book's design do that? Is that possible? So when I went to Linda, I said pretty much to her exactly what I've said to you. I said, this is how I feel. This is what I want to do. How do you feel about this? And her response was excitement, basically. She said, look, that sounds like a fantastic thing. Let's do it. And she told me at that very first meeting, I've got the cover. She saw the cover in her mind's eye at that very first meeting, and I didn't get to see what she had in her mind's eye for many months afterward that, but she had that cover. But
so she didn't suggest that you get one of her perfect books and then throw it in the mud and include a couple of leeches between the pages or anything like that?
well, one of the things I suggested to her very early on was that I wanted to include scrub. I wanted to include photographs of scrub, and like, for example, having a picture of scrub on the end papers. Like most of these photography books, you have something very beautiful, very abstract or whatever on the end papers, and I wanted to have scrub. So even this, in the kind of psychological sense of that, the reader has to go through that scrub to get to and what we ended up doing was having scrub right on the front cover. Which is even better. I've got to say, I said to Linda, I think on our second meeting, I said, Linda, you do realize that I'm basically asking you to do the impossible. I really, and the thing was, she did it. She actually pulled it off.
Well, maybe we should share the screen and show us the cover of the book and you can talk to it.
So here it is in its mailing box. Can you see that okay?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so, and of course...
So that's horizontal on the front there.
It's Bowra.
Bowra.
Good old Bowra rubeoides, yeah.
Oh, goodness me.
So, and I don't know exactly what she had in mind. I mean, this was essentially what she showed me when she first showed me her draft design. Pretty much she had this nailed by the time she showed it to me. She wanted from the start just one word, no subtitle, no long titles, one word. And it was pretty early on that I thought of the word unexplored, and we can talk about that later as well. No name, no author on the front.
Does the unscarlet colour have a significance there?
Well, actually, it kind of does, because this book, I've dedicated it to my late partner, and Linda had chosen that colour, and when we were sort of wondering which colour to have, she said which colour would Sahu have chosen. Sahu is the name of my partner, and I thought initially I had no idea. I didn't really know what her favourite colour was, but then I thought she'd want something that was bright but not gaudy, earthy and African, and that was really the colour that Linda had already chosen. But it's kind of outrageous, right? I mean, this is a book of Tasmanian wilderness photographs. What is bright orange doing there, and yet it kind of works. I absolutely adore the typeface of the title. I absolutely adore it, because it's so edgy. It's unexpected. It's broken. It's kind of. To me, it evokes. It's elegant, but it's incomplete. You see, I've got a I've got a bent towards a sort of East Asian aesthetic, including sort of Japanese aesthetic. And the Japanese have this concept of Wabi-Sabi, which is the aesthetic of the imperfect and the temporary and the incomplete. And so that, you know, that typo speaks about, and it kind of speaks of the brokenness of the scrub as well, you know, that you're going to get kind of the spikiness of it. So it's, and also when you look at the pattern on the front of the book, it's not pretty, right? You know, I mean, it's kind of that big one spike going right where you've right in front of your path. It's almost like a kind of warning, you know. So I wanted the book to be a little bit uncomfortable. You know, I actually want people at some level to feel a kind of frisson of discomfort, that this is not all going to be an easy ride. It's going to be slightly challenging, because let's face it, if you go into wilderness, that's what you're going to feel. It's not going to be comfort. In fact, I mean, you know, given the current craze for so-called luxury wilderness, it's an absolutely crucial thing to recognize that luxury and comfort are the anathema to wilderness.
It's a very brave design choice, but it's absolutely wonderful. I mean, I don't think anyone will look at this and turn their nose up. I think it's intriguing. It's inviting you to explore unexplored. It's inviting you to turn over that cover, go through the scrub, and to see what's behind it. And the other thing it does is, I mean, you would have thought about this too with your with engaging Linda. Yes, she's already produced some wonderful books by Chris Bell and Grant's Winter Light, and his next book, Wild Light, which is coming out shortly. Your book could have been and looked very similar and felt very similar and had a similar aesthetic to it, because designers do have their way of doing things, I suppose, their style, and it could have been another wonderful, extremely good, clean, wonderful book like theirs, and you've still got that, but it's a really brave move in a different direction, and it really stands out as something unique to you, and something that Linda's obviously been really excited to explore with you.
Well, I agree with you entirely. And you know, I right from the start, I just felt that a book with just the word unexplored on it, it would be kind of intriguing. Like you'd see it on a shelf, you know, particularly if you hadn't heard of it before, it would kind of lure people in, which again is, you know, like a kind of an echo of what wilderness does as well. And you know, I mean, I thank my lucky stars that it's come out with a very distinctive, you know, a very distinctive look. It's definitely not your run-of-the-mill Tasmanian wilderness photography book. It's got its own style, and you know, Grant's is coming out very soon too. And I mean, while Grant and I cooperated to the nth degree, we were also very careful not to compare notes on design, because we have sharing the same designer. We were very wary of coming out with books that looked too similar. So we sort of made a gentleman's agreement not to infect each other with our own ideas. But I think it's very important that each book does have its own distinctive look.
Absolutely agree, and very intriguing. Are you able to show us just inside the
yeah, sure. We'll take a bit of a trip through. I think just clicking here does it. Yeah, so you can't see that particularly clearly, but you may be able to just see there's the Bower reappears on that left page, the title page on the left. There's actually a sort of a monochrome, slightly faded out image of the Bower again there.
Oh, just on the cover again. Is that texture embossed?
Well, Linda's original idea was to emboss it. And in the end, I mean, it was incredibly difficult. You know, they would have had to make up a die the size of the whole book. And to cut a long story short, it was going to cost about $8,000 more to make the die. So in the end, we printed it. To be quite honest with you, I actually think in retrospect it's probably better that it is printed and not embossed. I may be wrong, but because we'll never get to see what it would have looked like embossed. But I have a hunch that the embossing would have been just a little bit too much of a good thing. And that
you can't really convey the feeling of Bauer on your skin through embossing on the front cover of a book. So.
No, we've had to have sort of needles sticking out of it. So
and the LW there, is that a mark that you've been using?
That's I decided, given the option of having a publisher name, I decided to revive Lost World Publications, which I'd used decades ago for greeting cards. Really? It just happens to be also Linda's initials. So the LW there theoretically refers to Lost World. And once again, I mean, like I thought of Lost World when I did those cards, because there is the Lost World Plateau in Tasmania, and I liked I like ambiguity. I mean, I've long felt that art is stronger for being ambiguous, in any shape or form. Art is, the best art is often, the meaning is something which is fluid, and that the viewer or the reader can explore. It's that it's not set, it's not fixed. And so the Lost World, it can refer to some distant place in the wilderness where there might still be dinosaurs, or it can be Lost World Plateau in Tasmania, or it could mean that the world is as good as lost, or it could perhaps be referring to a state of mind. So all of those kind of nuances, and similar kind of nuances apply to the title Unexplored as well.
Right. Show us that next page.
Yeah. So this is so Bob Brown wrote the foreword, which goes over 2 pages. So Bob and I go back many decades as well. So I was very lucky to have him contribute. And I don't show. Actually, we'll come to this one in a minute. Perhaps I should have included photographs, but I start the book with 2 quotes, which I feel are very important, and one on each page, because I feel in many ways the quotes convey exactly what the book is about. And the first quote is from these ancient Hindu scriptures called the Upanishads, which are about, I think, 3,000 years old, which begins with the words, "The earth seems to rest in silent meditation." And I can never remember exactly the rest of it, but it goes on to talk about the hills and the stars that all seem to be in meditation. And that, to me, really distills the very essence of what I feel is most important in terms of what I want to convey about what I feel is the essence of the wilderness experience. And what I feel is perhaps the most important lesson we can learn from wild country. And the second quote is by a chap called Osborne Jeeves, around about 1860, I think, or 1880, who was complaining bitterly about the scrub. Yeah. And says, that it's prevented the southern part of Tasmania from ever being explored. And the extraordinary thing is that, from the point of view of modern civilization, it's still unexplored, and long may it remain so.
Well, just go further into the meaning of the title.
Well, I guess initially it came from, I wanted a word which didn't have the word wild in it. Sorry, but I mean, the wild is just such a low-hanging fruit that it's scraping the barrel. So I was thinking, well, what word conveys that sort of ineffable, untouchable, unknown, blah, blah, blah. And it's rattling around in my head. And finally, I came upon Unexplored, and it had a ring to it. Immediately, I thought, hang on a minute, whoa, can I use a word like that without being seen to be insulting the whole Aboriginal community, right? So that was, and the very first words in the book are recognizing that the literal Witter has been home to the Palawa people for 40,000 years. So I'm making it very clear that I'm not using the word unexplored in that sense. But I also felt...
And it has been brought up as well. I noticed that there was at least one or two Facebook comments that were challenging that view right from the start when you announced the title of the book.
Yeah, well, I think most of the ones that I recall are mostly challenging it, saying that the country isn't unexplored. I think I have had challenges from Aboriginal people at times on Facebook in terms of what some of the things I've said, and rightly so. I accept, welcome the criticism. I don't recall anyone objecting to the title on that ground. But I was aware of that risk, and so I wanted to make it extremely clear in the book that I'm not in any way attempting to disregard the fact that we got no idea, really very little idea about how much of that country has been lived in or occupied or whatever, for in the previous 40,000 years before white people got here.
Well, it's worth noting that, we've had glaciation in Tasmania, and the landscape has changed in that 40,000 years significantly, and where vegetation now, is completely impenetrable, it may not have been in the past due to the way the climate was and the way the land was managed or not managed during that time.
Well, that's right, and we know that in the case of, say, the Lower Franklin, places like that, we know that those places were occupied in the last ice age, and apparently not occupied in the intervening 10,000 years. So, yes. What you say is absolutely true, and 40,000 years is an incredibly long time. And part of my own personal journey is waking up to the Aboriginal heritage of this landscape, which when I first started bushwalking, I was largely oblivious to, thanks to education or lack thereof. But I also felt that again, the word unexplored, I make it clear in the text that the word also is, or at least I hint very heavily that the word refers to our relationship to nature, our relationship to the wild, because the very first piece of text I have in the body of the book is asking the question, what happens when we go into wilderness, and what does it do to our mind? How does it change? How can it change our lives? And I suggest that these questions are largely unexplored, and I do feel that's the case. That really
does have unexplored can also just be a personal thing. I haven't explored that before, so it doesn't necessarily have to mean that the land itself is that way, but it's your relationship and the fact that you haven't explored that place as well.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, even if you've been there, have you explored it?
Yes.
The whole concept of exploration is an extraordinary one. And in one sense, exploration is a very colonialist idea, right? It's what the explorers were doing, and what were they doing? Looking for ways to make a quid out of the landscape. Where's the gold? Where's the Huron pine? And that's what most of the early exploration of Tasmania was all about. That. With some exceptions, and even those early pioneers would occasionally stop and get a blast of this extraordinary beauty of the landscape, which had nothing whatsoever to do with their quest for profit. And nowadays, the exploration has become a more, it's a different thing, which we can, talk about in various ways. But the real question is what is this landscape? What can it teach us, and what's its significance, and what is it really? And what really can happen when we go into wilderness? Not just what does happen, what actually can happen, which I think is, and those questions, I think, we've barely actually scratched the surface of as modern society. Additionally, from purely from the point of view of modern society, a lot of that country is unexplored. From in terms of contemporary society, in terms of what we know about it, in terms of who goes there. There's big tracts of Western Tasmania where basically no one goes, and no one has been, or very, very, very few people have been in the last 250 years, which is an extraordinary thing in the modern age. So all of those the title has all of those kind of meanings as well.
Mm. I'm noticing that there are no captions on the pages with the photographs, and I think well, there are page numbers here, are there? Or
these are image numbers, so there's no page numbers.
They're image numbers.
Yeah, that's right. And so there's notes on the photographs at the back, which I can show a little bit later on. In some cases, I identify the names of places and the locations, and in other cases, I don't. And there's a number of reasons for that. Well, first of all, I didn't want captions at all in the body of the book, because I wanted the photographs to speak for themselves, and what they speak about is not, the location is not important.
Yes.
At least that's how I feel.
Yep.
I want them to be allowed to speak without the interference of saying, oh, that's such and such a peak, and this is such and such a place. I mean, it may seem like a kind of, sort of a very fine point to be making, but I think it's actually, personally, I feel it's a very important point, that the way our minds work, naming does a great disservice to our understanding of a place, because when you name something, it's a kind of mental colonialism. Particularly, take the landscape. Okay, well, that's Federation Peak, right? I know what it is. I know where it is. I know what it does. I know who's been there. You know all this stuff, and you don't know jack shit. Actually, you know nothing about it, right? Rather, the knowledge is not the thing. The knowledge is actually a distraction from. Really what I'm getting at is, I suppose, that there's another way of knowing this landscape. There's another way of coming into contact with it. And I guess at some gut level, very early on, I felt that, I sort of kind of realized that photography is a way of connecting with that and conveying that, because it's non-verbal, and it's left brain. Right. Which is it? It's right brain, right? It's right. It's right brain. It's holistic. It's aesthetic. So it's all of those parts of the brain which are more concerned with wholeness and depth and connectedness, rather than with linearity and context and all of that stuff. You see, and the trouble with verbal language is that, generally speaking, it strings you along on the line of a linear way of thinking, and concept. It's concept, and concept can only go so far towards understanding wilderness or life generally.
And the images in the book, obviously they've been captured over a period of, since the last book, so that's quite a period of time. And in accordance with that, or maybe you could even comment on, and, does it actually stretch back that far in terms of the ages and also, the different photographic equipment you've used over that time?
Well, yeah, look, I'll just go back to this one, because this is a very old image. Most of the photographs in the book were taken in the last sort of 7 to 10 years with digital cameras. A few go back further than that, like this one is an old film image. Showing it for a number of reasons. This was the biggest risk we took in terms of image quality, because it's an old slide which we cropped and then spread across 2 pages. So we were stretching it to the limit. Was it going to work? Well, actually, the answer is yes. People love this image. People I've shown the book to, they're all really struck by it. No one said, "Oh, it looks a bit, grainy." It's not an issue at all. So we did get away with this.
I think the grain, would work well with storms and rain anyway, if that was the case.
That's right. Yeah, it doesn't detract. I mean, having got, you go over to this one. Well, this was, in the intermediate images were taken with a micro 4/3 camera, which I used for a number of years, including this one. Really, in terms of the way they come up in the book, that you'd really be very hard pushed to distinguish between these images and the full frame ones. Having said that, though, I mean, I did eventually upgrade to a full frame because the micro four thirds just wasn't giving me the image quality I want, particularly for some things, like particularly for vegetation. So
I guess mirrorless cameras coming out too would have helped that a lot in terms of, you know, DSLRs were a bit big and clunky to carry around.
Well, I always, you know, I mean, I was an Olympus fan. You know, I mean, when I first got an SLR camera, film camera, that was Olympus, and because they would revolutionize the size and portability of both the camera and the lens system. And so that's when for as long as I shot film, I shot with Olympus systems. Then Olympus brought out the OMD, and that was the first digital I got. And they pretty much did to digital photography what they originally did to film photography. You know, they got a very small, compact, mirrorless camera with high quality and so on and so on. But then basically they you know, they didn't capitalize on that. They didn't upgrade the sensor. And when they finally brought out the OM-X, which is like a brick, I finally gave up on Olympus and switched to a Sony, which I have to say I love. I mean, I think the Sony, you know, does a marvelous job.
I'm not going to argue with that.
So I mean, there's probably not a lot. I mean, that's a Sony image, for example, but you know, obviously, looking at it on screen, you couldn't possibly distinguish between this and the ones I've been showing you. But just getting back to your original question about how I went about the design, the other thing is, which is important point to make, is that from the moment I went to Linda, it became a collaborative effort. Not just the design, but the whole book as a package. Linda and her partner Tracy Diggins, the three of us worked together, and they made their own selection of which images should go in the book. And then they showed up to me, and it was very, very interesting. You know, I looked through their selection and thought, wow, that's interesting, because, you know, there was most of the ones that I'd shortlisted were on their short list, but some weren't. And some that were way down my list they decided to include. So it was, and so there was a little bit of toing and froing. Very little. Well, there was no conflict really. There was no sense of argument or anything like that. I mean, it was a very smooth process from go to woe. But it was an invaluable process to have their input into the selection of images and into the ordering of the images too. I mean, I'd come up with a first draft, and then, you know, they would suggest certain reorderings of images and text and so forth, and thank goodness they did, because there's no doubt whatsoever in my mind that the final product is stronger for having had that. So you know, I mean, I've been involved in a number of artistic collaborations over my artistic career, for want of a better word, and they've always been very fruitful. So I can strongly recommend, you know, it's always good to get some other artistic people involved to have an input, because often what can come out is something greater than either individual alone could have produced.
I'm interested in the design concept that you're showing here, where you've got one page that's fairly large image, and then on the other page there's a lot of white space, and the image is smaller and off to the side. What's the theory behind that? And is it something that, you know, other photographers should consider with their books and graphic design?
Well, I think the main thing is there's nowhere in this book has it got two large images next door to each other, because that's just overload. I mean, a friend of mine put it rather well. She said, you know, when you've got a double page spread with two images, your eyes sort of going from one to another. I mean, here it's fairly obvious. Just the size tells you what's the kind of dominant image, and the other one is kind of like a counterpoint. I don't know. I've got another example further on. I'll just zip through. Well, actually, here's a very good example. You know, like the one on the left is clearly like an echo of the one on the right. It's a close-up, different shot. So, you know, you've got this. You know, you've got your so-called hero image on the right, which is the overview and the focus on the left. And so there's a bit of that. I mean, the earlier one we looked at is a slightly different theme, but you know, so in a situation like this, I think two images complement each other very well. The main thing is that they're not fighting each other. You know, if you've got two images which are fighting each other, and that's where, you know, a lot of artistry can go into pairing images Even images which maybe at first glance don't appear to be related, but that actually conceptually they are. For example, if we zip back here again, these ones just in terms of they're quite different subject matter, but the rock bluffs echo each other. So there's a conceptual similarity between those two images.
Yeah, I really love that, in terms of not letting the images compete with each other, and gives people a natural flow of their eye rather than having to look through both eyes or something at the same time. So it makes a lot of sense.
Well, yeah, Linda said explicitly right at the start she loves white space. And I certainly, I agree with her, because once again, there is this kind of Zen Eastern aesthetic in that. It gives a photograph room to breathe, but it gives the reader room to breathe as well. It sounds a little bit counterintuitive, even a bit sort of oogie boogie, but a blank page is actually telling you something. There's a value in having a blank page. And wherever I've got text, the text is small. It's quite low key, so you can read it, or you can just see it as being another essentially blank page. Read it or not. But the photograph is just sitting on its own. So I guess really what it does, it gives the mind space in which to contemplate. That's essentially it. It's a bit like, in that sense, it's like a gallery. Like, if a gallery's got images all crowding each other, it's not going to work. A good display is going to give plenty of space to each image. Another thing I've done, I'm sort of jumping around a bit. Oh, here we are. Here's a good example. I did want some images to bleed, some of them to the edge and some of them right over the spine. I was on a trip last summer with two companions who were talking about their taste in books, and they both agreed most sincerely that there's two things they hated, and one was images bleeding to the edge of the page, and the other was bleeding across the spine. So I'm laughing.
Stubbornly, you've included that to piss them off, have you?
Well, exactly. Well, look, just on that point, getting back to the cover and so forth, I seriously felt from the start I would actually rather have some people dislike this book than have everyone just think it's nice. You know what I mean? I'd actually rather have it edgy to the point where some people think, I don't quite like that. This image, for example, I knew, it's one example where I've bled across the spine. And in one sense, the nearest thing to a centerpiece is that distant hill, which is right on the spine. So it's cut in half. But at the same time, funnily enough, I think it works. I actually think it works quite well.
I think if the peak went upwards, it might be a different story, but because it just sits in there. It's really, you wouldn't want to have a very strong central element if you were doing that, because it would look a little bit out. Yes.
Yeah.
But I guess the offset one that you had in the previous, that would work well for a central. So
here's another example. Here, in a way, what's on the left-hand page, it's kind of like an afterthought. It's part of the image, but it's the fact that it's divided off. You see, it's also interesting. Dividing pictures is something it's nothing new about it. It predates books. In the Middle Ages, people were painting diptychs and triptychs for churches and stuff like that. So having images which spread across more than one display medium is got a long lineage, so it's not like it's anything kind of which there's any kind of law that you shouldn't do it from an artistic point of view. But this image here again, I don't know if people can see it on their screens, but that little blue dot on the right hand side is Grant Dixon. Making himself useful by getting a sense of scale. So clearly, the strong part of the image is on the left-hand page, and the right part is really, okay, well, it's almost like the scale of a map, you know what I mean? So, once again, a lot of thought has gone into how these images sit on the page. Each one is being, has been put on the page the way the particular image deserves, what it needs to tell its story.
And also the inclusion of a human element like that in a picture is, I guess you don't see that too often in wilderness books. Do you have a view on that in terms of that difference?
Well, yes, I do. I'm just trying to sort of gather my thoughts. First of all, I mean, I have generally not taken photographs with people in them. Mainly because I walk by myself, and secondly because I think often, having photographs of people in it, it kind of it takes away from the immediacy of being confronted with nature. If you look at Instagram, there's a current trend of landscape photographs with people in them, and often a tiny figure, a small figure, right central. You've got it's been done to death, really. It's almost become like the de rigueur method of taking a landscape photograph these days. You've got to have a small figure, looking sort of overawed and scaled down by this immense landscape. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, except I do feel that particular meme has been bled to death by overuse. In this one, I mean, it's excellent that Grant is there, because without it, you wouldn't get the sense of scale that he gives it.
Absolutely.
I mean, really, having that human figure there. I mean, he's in a fairly awkward position because he's perched Grant-like on the edge of a bloody cliff, and he's with his tripod. But once you see that figure, you think you realize, my God, this is a big place. This is a seriously big waterfall we're looking at.
Yeah, and look, I'll just say the image before this one that you showed, and this one, to me, is someone that knows. Not that one, the lake below the big mountain with the.
Oh right, yes, right. I'm sorry.
I won't say where they are, but to me, that one. So to me, that those two locations are so extraordinarily difficult to get to. I just want to hammer to the audience that this is serious wilderness we're talking about. This isn't anywhere near anything, and I just wanted to make that point based on those two images, because I know where these two actually have been taken, and it's an extraordinary effort to get to both of those places. And I know from the rest of the images, nearly every place in this book is an extraordinary effort to get to, but those two in my mind just blow me away as to how difficult some of these images have been to achieve, simply in the sheer bloody mindedness it's taken to get to these locations,
and many days too, and completely off track, obviously. And there's need to be a very accomplished outdoorsman or outdoors person to be able to make that happen.
We're just zipping back here to this photograph. This is the remotest place I think I've got a photograph of, and it took me 8 days to get to this waterfall on a 19-day trip.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of the reason I included it. The other reason I included it is because of the extraordinary golden rocks, which are I mean, it's like almost like a waterfall over a cliff of gold. I mean, it's an extraordinary
Unbelievable.
thing. That's introducing another whole aspect of the book. Well, in several ways. I mean, first of all, one of the questions I ask myself frequently as a photographer is, well, how can we do something different? Because there's not really a lot of point just going out with a camera and taking photographs that have been done before, right? I mean, the extreme example is you set your camera up at Dove Lake and take another photograph of Cradle Mountain from the same view, and which has been photographed 50 million times before. But even in terms of style, how I mean, it's an extraordinary challenge as a photographer generally, but landscape in particular. How can you do something different? And I mean, one very simple answer to that question is you go somewhere where no one else has been, or go somewhere where very few photographers have been, and then it's not an issue anymore. I mean, the style might be, but you can actually, in Tasmania, you've got the opportunity to go to places where you can be pretty sure no one's taken a camera before, which is an extraordinary thing. And so you can actually shoot new stuff. The other thing is, I mean, to me, the long wilderness journeys are about as close as it gets to perfection as far as the wilderness experience is concerned. To go deep into remote country is to go into the very heartland of what wilderness is all about in every respect. And I mean, that comes back to the question I asked, what does that do? And what is the importance of that? And I mean, really, I think that's an open question. I mean, it's an open question for me. I don't pretend to have the answer to it, but it's a question that I've been asking for all my life, ever since I started walking as a teenager, as to what, because I mean, I'm sure you guys know exactly what I mean when I say, there's something extraordinarily special about it. And obviously there is, in the sense that, I mean, look at what a magnet the Tasmanian wilderness has been to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people over the decades, of photographers and the activists and the people who, the bushwalkers, the people who've connected with that landscape. It means so much to them, and probably we're all kind of at a loss to say exactly why. Perhaps we don't need to, but it's an interesting question as to what that connection means, what that I mean, to take another example, Denny King, who, for those of you who don't know, was the sole resident of down at Port Davey, in a remote location down in southwest Tasmania, for many years. And he made the comment that the people, once you've tasted the button grass water, that those people always return. And I mean, he obviously, probably didn't mean it literally, but I know exactly what he means metaphorically, that there's something gets in under your skin. You step out into that bush, one morning something gets under your skin, and once that's in you, you're never the same again. You never lose that. And what is that exactly? What is that? And that's part of what I'm exploring in this book as well. In the text, particularly asking that question as what, and particularly what is the essence of that those wilderness experiences where kind of everything stops. Time stops. What's actually happening in those moments.
It's a profound question, really, and you ask the questions, but it's going to have different answers for different people, isn't it?
Well, it is. That's right. And the words that I use and the words that you use may well be different. And I mean, I think probably inevitably so, because I think probably words are not adequate. And I do feel quite strongly that I actually say in one of the pieces of text that what I encountered in wilderness as a young bushwalker was something that nothing in my upbringing or education had prepared me to meet. Because I don't think our Western-oriented society and culture has got the framework to make sense of it. And the irony of it is that an awful lot of Indigenous cultures, it makes eminent sense to them because it's part of their culture. They may use words that are strange to us, but it's pretty obvious that they're recognizing something in their relationship to the land, and we don't have the words for that. And not only we don't have the words, but it doesn't make sense in terms of the way we see the world. That's the essence of it. It doesn't make sense to our science, and it doesn't make sense to our conceptual framework. And this is where I think, where it does make sense, I think, is when you start getting into the realm of art and artists whose work is partly to explore those realms that are kind of off the map as far as logical thinking is concerned, what we call logical thinking.
Is that the one there back there when I might have seen you, or is there another time you visited that?
No, this was the Franklin one was that trip. I think I had actually gone in there, specifically to photograph the river, and I spent an afternoon just blown away by these patterns.
It's remarkable.
Yes, I think it was the same trip. Yeah,
fantastic.
It's extraordinary place.
yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting just going back to the movie Franklin, and talking about all the tons of gear they had with them, etc. You never get that sense. I mean, I was thinking all along, I was going, there must be a whole crew of other people. In fact, I knew Luke had been there, and I knew there must have been a whole bunch of other people. But in the documentary, you focused on a single person, and it gives a real sense of the remoteness of the river, the way that it's been done. But of course, to those of us that tend to think a bit left-brained and logically, you go, oh well, there must be a cameraman taking that shot, and it's not like they've strapped a GoPro to their head and it's an artistic underwater shot. It must have been hard to set up.
There was surprisingly few people on the crew. It was, you can only fit a certain amount of things in rafts and things. But I guess in the grand scheme of what you would normally see go down the river, it's probably a little more. But quite often, it was only the director and the cinematographer following Oliver along, or even just the drone. So it was moments where it wasn't so full on. But yes, it is. It probably would have been similar to the same size of a normal trip, but but just with the extra gear, which is considerably more. So,
actually, the Franklins are an interesting concept when we're talking about wilderness and talking about some of the concepts that you've explored with wilderness, Martin, and definitely in that refining the definition of wilderness and that sort of thing. And the Franklin is the great wilderness river, but it is travelled by a lot of people these days on rafting trips. It's still very remote and dangerous, and you're only going to see people that are in your particular rafting trip. But it may well be that there's a rafting trip a day behind you and then another rafting trip a day behind you as well. So you've got the Franklin, but then you've got the tributaries, I can't speak properly today, tributaries that run into the Franklin, and they would be completely, they would be even more wilderness-like, things like the Jane and other tributaries that come in that you have explored and that sort of thing. And it must be almost like coming off one of those tributaries and joining the Franklin must almost be like coming back into society, maybe. I don't know.
No.
Because the chance that you'll see someone, I haven't been in the area, so I don't know. But I'm just wondering about your thoughts on it.
Well, I mean, if you to take a slightly more general view, I mean, basically, we're talking about solitude versus crowding, for want of a better word, or numbers, and that's an issue which is increasingly facing many parts of the wilderness, like the Anne Range and the Arthurs. That at the moment, some of these places are getting stampeded, and now Parks has had to introduce a permit system and so forth. I mean, it's all relative, isn't it? To somebody who's just walked out of a city and walking around Dove Lake with 100 other people is still going to feel like a wilderness experience. But if you've just been out in some remote place and haven't seen anyone for 3 weeks, and coming across a party of 4 is going to be a culture shock. But I think first of all, there is a tremendous value in solitude in wilderness. Like complete solitude. Yep. Because even to be with one other person, you've automatically got a social situation. You're operating in a kind of in a social milieu, which if you're not careful is already a kind of a barrier to just being completely alone with wilderness. I mean, again, some people may feel that view to be somewhat extreme, and I make no apology for that. It probably is, but I mean, I do know myself that personally, I feel that to be completely alone in wilderness is a kind of transcendent experience. If there's other people around, it very easily detracts from that. I mean, having said that, for example, I mean, I've done a lot of trips with other people at various times, either working for Parks or leisure trips. And I mean, Grant and I have been away on many trips. I mean, Grant's great because he's a very taciturn guy, and he knows how. I mean, he's in the same space, But I was on a trip with Grant and one other chap last summer, and I mean, we got on great. I mean, it was a very tough trip. So it was I was very grateful to have those guys with me, because in fact, if I'd been on my own, I'm not sure if I would have made it through. It was extremely tough. But there was one morning in particular when they were off taking photographs, and I stepped out onto a moorland, and I was suddenly alone. In the sense, and suddenly I connected with the landscape in a way that I hadn't on the rest of the trip. It was suddenly, there was a kind of energy there, or communication there, and it was like, here it is. I kind of missed it. And when there's other people around, even it's a subtle thing, and that's one thing. I mean, I do feel quite strongly that wilderness, although it's it's, for all its ruggedness, there was aspects of wilderness which are very fragile, in the sense that that the essence of a wilderness experience can be destroyed by something like a plane going through the sky 40 kilometers away, or one person appearing on a ridge, that it can change the quality of aloneness that you can enjoy. And if there's lots of people around, well, it's pretty much like walking down the street with a bit of scenery in the background, to put it really crudely.
Yeah, it's a bit to do with your expectation of, if your expectation is to be completely alone in wilderness, and then to have a helicopter fly overhead or something like that, it really pisses you off. It shatters what you've experienced and becomes, it suddenly brings you back to reality, and can be really quite distracting, and something that takes some time to get over. I mean, I recall a time when a drone suddenly appeared. I was only in the Cradle Mountain area, but I was alone, and there was no one in that particular area. It was a fair way off the normal beaten track, and this drone suddenly appeared, and I was really, really, really annoyed that it was there. It was making a noise, and it just snapped me out of the really great place that I was in, and just basically pissed me off. And I guess when you've got the expectation that you're in a wilderness place and suddenly it's shattered like that, it can be quite disheartening.
I think also there's people, a lot of people probably haven't experienced that feeling of being alone and in the truly in the wilderness as well. And I mean, I have to admit, I haven't experienced it that many times. I love hiking with other people, but I completely know what you mean about the solitude and that something is stripped away, and there's it's hard to put into words. Martin's probably much more eloquent with that, but I feel like if someone would want to seek that out, it's very well worth doing, and it's getting more diminishing, I suppose, in terms of creating that experience for yourself, but it's something well worth trying.
Well, the way I put it in this book is that I'm saying the essential message of this book is that the landscape is actually alive, and I mean alive as in sentient, as a living being. It is actually a living being. And to me, the essence of a wilderness experience is to actually see that and feel it, and which means that you're communicating with a living being. I mean, forget aliens. I mean, we've already arrived. That this is it. That the earth itself is actually alive, and that the hills are actually alive, and the rivers are actually alive. And again, like, I mean, indigenous cultures would just say, God, it's about bloody time. We've known that for the last 100,000 years. But for some reason, us white fellas, to put it crudely, we don't know that. We don't accept that. We don't see it. We don't feel it. And it's almost as if at least the way our society is constructed, you have to go out on a limb to find that. You have to go out of your way to strip off all this modern, distraction and comforts and so forth, and get away from roads and get away from drones and get away from as much as possible, and risk your comfort, maybe even risk your safety, and stand exposed. I mean, that's really a big part of going into wilderness, is you are exposed. You've still got a raincoat, you've still got basic protections, but the fact is you're much more at the mercy of the living world, the weather and the elements. You're steeped in those elements, and if you do all that, and if your mind is reasonably quiet, you might wake up one morning and find yourself in that place where you suddenly realize you're there. It's alive. And that comes back to the quote that I said at the beginning. This ancient quote from India, that the earth seems to rest in silent meditation. There's a recognition there that what is actually there in the earth is a kind of mind. It may be a meditating mind, but it is a kind of consciousness itself. I mean, there's a deep, deep insight in that, a deep insight, not just into earth, but into the very nature of life itself. There's some perception there of what I call a life force in everything. And in wild places, you come into contact with that. That's essentially what I'm saying. And it seems like that is reluctant to reveal itself if you go in there with a noisy mind, or if you go in there in a chattering party, or if you go in there and step out of a helicopter. You're not going to see that. It's almost like it retreats. And I'd even go so far as to say these days, and I mean, like I go out of my way to make myself sound crazy, because I think it's necessary to do so. Like the problem with helicopters, for example, it's not just that they might disturb the experience of a person if they happen to be below, but even if there's no one below, the problem with a helicopter is you're disturbing the peace of the wilderness itself. You're disturbing the peace of the mountains. You're disturbing the peace of the landscape, and that is important. That peace is important in its own right. That's again something which we haven't got our heads around, I don't think. It's news to me if we have.
That's an extraordinary image, by the way. I'm really,
oh yes,
I'm absolutely transfixed by it. It's just amazing.
I haven't seen anything like that.
That's a chalk stone at the end there, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, there's a funny story about this. I mean, which is kind of, you get these little stories about how you're going to take certain photographs. So I went up to this river valley because I knew there was a chalk stone there. I'd seen it before, and I thought, I reckon there'll be some nice photographs around that. I might be able to do something. And the river levels were very low, which gave me confidence I could get into the river. So I got to the chalk stone, took one look at it, and thought, there's no way I can take a photograph of this. It's just not right. So I hunted up and down the river and found another one. I mean, can you believe it? I found another goddamn chalk stone. And I spent the best part of a day poking around here, pretty much in this position, taking photographs, and didn't really get exactly what I want. So the next morning I went down there and I stood there for 4 hours waiting for this shot.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. It really is. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It's just, it's clearly a very hidden, way out of the way sort of area. I mean, if this was in the United States and was close to the road, there'd be 100 photographers behind it. It's just an extraordinary place, and you've just captured it so beautifully. The way that it just all just draws you through to that little gap there where the chalk stone is. It's an extraordinary image, and just
like a portal or something like that.
Yeah, it is, and it's the thing about it is it's square. It's like, or rectangle. It's actually like a man-made doorway, and you actually have to look close, and obviously we're seeing it on a computer screen here, but I guess, in the book you'll be able to look closer and go, oh no, that's a natural thing, not a man-made thing. But it could almost be like a flooded entrance to a mine or something like that. And it's quite extraordinary that the way it's framed as like a doorway. It really is.
And I love that it almost looks like the forest has sort of been projected out of the doorway or into the reflection there as well.
Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely.
A couple of things I'd say about this also. I mean, I've always liked surrealism, not so much in the Salvador Dali sense, but more like the Rene Magritte sense of images which kind of don't make sense and therefore do because they don't make sense. In other words, they shake up your comfortable view of reality. And having done that, you're then kind of free to look. You know what I mean? Like, the problem with the way we see things is that the brain is far too quick to think that it knows what it sees. You say, oh yeah, that's Federation Peak, or that's a mountain, or that's a lake, right? But when you confront the eye with something where you don't know, then you have to look afresh. And when you do look afresh, you can maybe see a little deeper into what's actually there. I mean, I don't know if I'm over-laboring this point, but really one of the hearing problems is we don't know how to see. We don't actually see anything much at all. So, like you walk past a tree and you see that's a tree, but you're not looking at it and you're not seeing it, and you're certainly not standing and gazing and drinking it in and feeling it and absorbing it and appreciating it and you know what I mean? Like, and one thing about wilderness is that when you're out there, there's not a lot to do. Maybe you're walking from A to B, but, you often have a lot of time on your hands just to actually really slow down. So I like taking photographs which are enigmatic and shake things up. I mean, the other thing is I don't know really, when I took this photograph, it was really more of a gut feeling than anything else. I wasn't really sort of thinking too much about what I was saying or even what it was looked like. It was more, I mean, really just looking for the viewfinder and feeling what felt like an exciting image. That's part of it is kind of more going by instinct than by calculation.
Yeah. And sorry to go back to a more basic photographic level, but we do have a wide audience with varying degrees of ability. This would be a very difficult photograph to capture because of the dynamic range of the scene. How would have you approached this in terms of photographing and post-processing?
Because I mean, I was specifically waiting for sunshine on those trees because I needed that brightness in the reflection. I needed that bright yellow-green in the reflection. But I guess the simple answer to your question is by this stage, I had tremendous confidence in the capability of the Sony A7R III. I mean, its dynamic range is phenomenal. I mean, I dare say there's other sensors out there which can do even better these days. I mean, the A7R IV for one. But
3 is probably just as good. Yeah.
And I mean, I do almost, in situations like this, I underexpose. Because I've again, experience has taught me that it's very rare that I can't pull stuff out of the shadows. I mean, obviously I didn't want to lose shadows, but I probably underexposed by at least probably the best part of a stop, actually, certainly at least 2/3 of a stop, to make sure I didn't burn out the highlights. There's probably no highlights burnt out there. I mean, obviously in the background, immediately behind the chalk stone, things are pretty bright. But I was just able to hold it in. So to answer your question, I can't remember if I was bracketing or not. I do occasionally bracket, and I almost invariably end up just using one image anyway. Because it's I usually find I can get everything I need out of one image. And despite the enormous dynamic range here, this was one example. I mean, there are exceptions occasionally, but this was one image. And of course, it was also important. I mean, because there was little breezes and so forth. I had to wait for the right combination of lack of breeze and then sunlight in the right place and so forth. So I didn't have a lot of opportunity to bracket anyway.
Yeah. It's certainly a photograph that that doesn't scream instant gratitude. It's not the sort that you just, you park your car and then walk down to the creek, take a photo, and then you're happy. This is the exact opposite of that. This is walk for many days, find a place that's extraordinary, realise that you can't take a photo there, and so you go further down the river and find an even more extraordinary place, and then wait 4 hours for the right conditions to take the photograph. And it really,
and also don't create any ripples with your own legs. And
that's right. I was standing on a wobbly rock, so every time I needed to stretch my legs, there was more ripples. And of course, the other factor here is the river level was exceptionally low, because otherwise I probably wouldn't have been able to stand there at all, and the photograph would have been impossible because the river level could have been up a metre or more. So it was exceptionally low at the time, which is part of what attracted me into there at that particular time. I mean, even not knowing it was Chockstone was there, I guess, again, perhaps not particularly carefully thought through, but at some instinctive level, I felt, this was the time to go with the river levels exceptionally low. But I mean, the beauty of part of the beauty of wilderness photography is just the hunt. I mean, it's the kind of hunt, but more to the point, you're never really knowing what you're going to find. In fact, that's part of the beauty of it. I mean, you may go with particular goals in mind, and occasionally you might achieve those. More often than I find, I end up, if I've got a goal in mind, I end up getting either nothing or something completely different, looking somewhere else entirely. So, a big part of the beauty of it is just being open to possibilities. And
with this one here too, I certainly don't recall seeing it, because I would absolutely have remembered if I had seen it. Have you showed anyone before, and is there a certain number of your images in the book actually also unexplored from a other viewer standpoint?
Well, most of them have been on Facebook. Because when I've been on those trips, I've usually come back and posted stuff on Facebook. So in that sense, they've been seen. Only one or two of them have been in other books, or one I think has been in another book. A couple of them were in a set of greeting cards I did many years ago. But so they've had a bit of circulation. But like this one, apart from Facebook, hasn't been printed at all before. I mean. Quite a few of these photographs I took after I decided to do the book. Right. There's basically 2 summer seasons in the interim, and both of them were very fruitful photographically, remarkably so. Even last summer, remarkably so, including this one and the one I'll show you.
That's an extraordinary photograph, and an important one for the context of preserving wilderness as well. It really is a wonderful photograph.
This one and this, I beg your pardon, I haven't got the other one there. I thought I did, but never mind. I've got another photograph without the mist, which is quite remarkable reflection. But this is an example of just extraordinarily good luck, because I'd got down to this location the previous day and looked at those cliffs and thought, geez, it'd be nice if I got some reflections. But you don't. What are your chances of getting glassy reflections in Tasmania? This was more or less midwinter as well, and the next morning it was as glassy as you can come. And then I had this beautiful mist as well. So it was an extraordinary gift.
But you make your own luck. You've got to be there. And you were, and like I said, this is a very important image. In the context of, it's a bit hard to talk about it without talking about the actual issue here. But for those that aren't familiar, I'm not going to say where it is, but there's a proposal to actually put a hut right here, and it's. I guess one of the counterpoints of this is your photograph shows the value of putting a hut there from the point of view of selling a product, because look how extraordinarily beautiful it is. But so it's got those two aspects, if you know what I mean. Like you're actually showing, okay, it's a great place to put a hut because it's extraordinarily beautiful, Of course, it's a ridiculous place to put a hut in reality, because your photo also shows how extraordinary the wilderness actually is here.
Yeah, I mean, rightly or wrongly, I decided, to say almost nothing about conservation issues in this book. It might seem counterintuitive, but my feeling really was that, I mean, obviously, those messages need to get out, and they are getting out in all sorts of ways. But I wanted to do something different in this book, which is to focus on that deeper message that wilderness is. And I mean, the thing is that, the logic really to that is that if you get that message, then everything else falls into place. The conservation thing will become crystal clear once you see that. Or at least you've got a much stronger basis for understanding why it's important to keep these places wild. When I got down to this lake, I'd only been to this lake once before, and I don't think I'd been right to the outlet creek, and that was decades and decades before. And so I came back to this. This was not this immediately last winter, but the previous year. What really struck me was, I mean, although this range is not particularly remote, because it's not very far from a highway and it's not very far from a vehicle track. We're talking about a few kilometres. But I came down to this, where the outlet creek is, and it was pristine, basically. No track, no campsite, hardly, well, really no trace that people have been there. And the same goes for pretty much the whole lake amphitheatre. So, it's a wild place. It's a pristine place. And this whole question about this scramble to basically urbanize wilderness is one of the main threats to wilderness now, perhaps the main threat to wilderness at present in Tasmania and through much of Australia. You're quite right. I mean, I do have a bit of text in the back and the photographs and the notes on the photographs talking about the pros and cons of publishing photographs. I mean, the pros being that they can obviously educate people as to what the values are, but whenever you publish any photograph, there's a risk that you're advertising a place, that you might attract usage there, and even the more you publicize a place, the more you risk detracting from the mystery about it. And again, I think the mystique of wilderness, although it might seem a little bit kind of an artificial thing to be thinking about, I still think it's an important component of our ability to connect with what is wild. In other words, that the more I know about range X and Mount X and so forth, the more I think I know about it, the less my mind is pliable to be able to connect with its true wildness. So in many cases, the less we say about these places, the better. So it's a two-edged sword. And I've attempted to reflect that at least partly in what I say about the photographs. Many of them I don't say where they are. Some of them I do, for one reason or another. But this region, I don't say where it is, even though, as you say, from a political point of view, I mean, there's some advantage in doing so. I mean, and this photograph has been used by the Tasmanian National Park Association, for example, on their website, talking about this hut proposal. And I mean, when we say hut, we're talking about a lodge with bloody helipad and God only knows what other infrastructure. So you're talking about a small town by the time they're finished.
It's a complex, yes.
The wildness of these places is totally destroyed. Let's not mince our words. Any sense of the pristineness is completely shattered by this outpost of civilization, which we will have constructed there.
There's some real conflicts with that we all go through with these concepts of do we publish something or do we not publish something? Inherently, as artists, we want people to see our work. We just have to be so conscious about the messaging that we provide with the photographs, and people will call you out all the time for being hypocritical or being elitist or that sort of thing. Oh, well, if you can go there and see it, why can't I? Well, you can. You just have to go there without a helicopter or a lodge. And unfortunately, some people don't understand the concept of just because it's a place that a human can get to doesn't mean that we have to make it accessible for all humans to get to.
Well, but the other important point, which I think really needs to be hammered home, is that if you do make it accessible to 100 people a day or whatever it is, you've made the landscape accessible, but the experience is gone.
Yes.
You have fundamentally changed what you have accessed. That's the key thing. The experience, the opportunity, the wildness, the quality, the essence of the place has all gone out the window. And what you have instead is, like I say, is another outpost of suburbia, basically. I mean, to put it bluntly. So, you've conquered wilderness yet again. You've brought it to heel. It's now a pleasant view that you can watch as you sit in your lounge chair, sipping fine Tasmanian wines, and before you retire to your comfortable shower and a comfortable bed, which you can do anywhere, 90% of the planet already on the nearest road. And you can convince yourself that you've now seen the wilderness, and you haven't seen jack shit, because the wilderness has been destroyed by the urbanization that was necessary for you to go there and lord it over the landscape. It's not about elitism. It's about the humility of being prepared to go without the bloody logistical support. And I know perhaps I'm oversimplifying the argument, but all of these things are important, and the ultimate luxury is to be able to go alone deep into the remotest country on the planet, and just be there, in the midst of this vast wild landscape. I mean, what could be a greater experience than that? But you have to pay a price for that. A serious price. And again, I mean, that's partly what the text in this book. It's not all serious. I mean, I hope people will find some humor in it. But I talk about some of the hardships. I don't lay down with a thick trowel, but I talk about the experience of going to Vanishing Falls and covering a kilometre in 4 hours over 2 successive days, and that was going in and same coming out again. Extremely demanding, and yet it was one of the most rewarding trips I've ever done.
Absolutely. I mean, I probably wrongly call myself a wilderness photographer, because I'll never get to these places that you've been. I'm just simply not capable of doing it. But the fact that it's there, and the fact that I won't get there, doesn't mean that I want to get in a helicopter and drop myself up there or build a road to it or whatever. Just knowing that it's there and knowing it's at peace is enough for me. It's not going to be enough for everyone, and clearly not, because people argue that they should have access to these places. But it's just it's wonderful that you're able to show us these areas, and just knowing that they're there is for me comfort enough. Even though I'd love to go to Vanishing Falls, for example, but I know in my heart of hearts that it's just not possible for me to ever get there. It's interesting, the psyche of it all.
I'm also interested in the paradox as well between there's a prevailing thought that for people to be able to connect with these places that they'll never see, they need to we need, so it helps to show them the beauty of those places through photographs, so they can actually understand the value that is there. But then at the same time, it creates a level of desire for them to want to see those locations for themselves as well. Do you have a point of view on that, Martin, or is that overstated, that we really do need to show people these places? I mean, I guess in the Franklin documentary, they talk about the significance of Dombrovskis's photo within that, and maybe that's something from the past. But Do you have some thoughts around that?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you've stated the dilemma very well, and there's like so many of these questions, there's no ultimate answer, right? I mean, you can't simply say, well, this is how it's answered, because life's not that simple. It is a two-edged, it's a balancing act. I mean, most of the photographs in this book are of areas that are protected, quote unquote. I mean, they're protected in the sense that, I mean, like here's Precipitous Bluff, right? And in New River Lagoon, it's in the World Heritage Area, which is the highest protection we've got. However, down on the coast there, they want to build another of these lodges, right? There's another threat. So none of it's entirely protected. But I mean, I think we need to. I mean, there's a number of questions here. One is promoting areas which, like in the case of the Franklin, it was in the days it was under threat of being dammed. Peter Dombrovskis's work obviously contributed enormously to getting the message out there as to what was going to be lost. People attempted that with Petra as well. I mean, we will never begin to understand what was actually lost when Petra was flooded. Or indeed, I mean, if the Franklin had been flooded, okay, Rock Island Bend, but all those other bends in the river would have gone under as well. Every single one, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of immaculately beautiful little corners of that river would have been flooded. But in addition to that, I think we need to keep conveying the message about the importance of wilderness generally, and the importance of wild country. I mean, I know that's what this book is about, rightly or wrongly. That's the message I want to get across, is that it's not simply reinforcing, but what I'm trying to do is to actually further the argument, take it more and say, look, there's actually something even more important out here, which we haven't really considered yet. It's not just about scenery. It's not just about recreation. It's not just about experience. It's about reconnecting with the cosmos, at the deepest level of your being, if that's not overstating it. And reconnecting with truths about what life is. I mean, I know these are big words, but I'm saying them with some seriousness. That I do feel that I mean, we have a lot to learn. Us human beings have a lot to learn about what life really is, about who we really are, and this consumerist, materialist trip that we're on right now sure as hell isn't telling us anything about that. It's just one dirty, great big distraction away from the much deeper truths of life. And obviously it's also doing incalculable damage to life on Earth. So we need to start questioning in a big way what we're doing here. And going into wilderness, you're going, in a sense, back to something much more fundamental. You're going back to a state of life which precedes all of this human concept, clever idea stuff that humans, clever little humans have been tricking ourselves with for thousands of years. And particularly in recent centuries, this whole very, very sort of sophisticated technological journey that we're on, which we've become totally dazzled by and enthralled by and sucked into. And meanwhile, this eternal beauty is still there. It's still out there waiting to be rediscovered. And if we actually connected with that and really learnt what it meant, you might fundamentally change how we live. That's kind of what I like to think I'm driving at, in some gentle way in this book. Because I do, this is it's not a trivial thing. It's, if you think about wilderness in terms of tourism or recreation, or God help us, knocking off Abels and peak bagging and all that stuff, it's trivializing sorry to say it, but it's trivializing something which is actually sublime.
Mm.
And I think we need to recognize that it is sublime. It's not about making your little petty profit out of some bloody tourist operation, which I will concede will allow some people to enjoy the scenery and maybe learn a bit about wilderness. I mean, these things are true, but what we also need to recognize is that there's something vastly more important than that. And I mean, let's face it, our political systems aren't within a bull's roar of recognizing that. If I got up in Parliament, Bob Brown, did get out in Parliament. He got up in the Senate and said this kind of stuff. And of course, no one listened to him. But it needs to be said. But our political systems are also trivialized. I mean, we don't. If you can't make money out of it, they don't want to know. If it's not economics, if it's not about power, they're not interested. But we need to be interested in this. We need to recognise here in Tasmania, particularly, we're sitting on the doorstep of a blast furnace of spiritual energy called the Tasmanian wilderness, we can't. How important is that for the planet? I mean, we know a little bit about that, but how important is that for the planet's health in the deepest sense? It's of incalculable importance. So that's what people need to be reminded of, and that's what we need to explore. Really, that's essentially it. That's what we need. We have the opportunity to explore that, to ask the question and to find out.
And that sounds like a very, very personal journey, as well as just finding yourself through reconnecting with nature and the wilderness itself as well, which is pretty special.
And on that note, we're pretty much out of time. Martin, do you want to just unshare your screen to get you
sure,
nice and big on the screen again?
No, I guess it's worth just discussing the pre-sale. I think Martin was ending soon in terms of a special deal there.
People in Tasmania can get the book at an 11% discount and collect it from Find Your Feet in Hobart in Elizabeth Street up until September the 16th, which is Friday week. After that, they can still buy it online to have it posted to them. So that will appeal mainly to people on the mainland. And after that, also fairly soon after that, it'll be available in shops at the full retail price, $95.
Yep, and just a reminder that the pre-sale link or general website link is on our Talking Landscape Photography blurb for the show.
The description.
Yep. And what was it? What was that address again for those that are not looking that up?
bit.ly, so that's bit.ly /unexplored Tas.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Martin, you described the Tasmanian wilderness as sublime in your closing remarks, and it truly is. But this book that you produced is also sublime. It's just a magnificent publication. I can't wait to get my hands on the physical copy of it very shortly. It's an important document for Tasmanians and for Australians and for the world. It's to show what we do have here deep in the wilds of Tasmania, away from the roads, away from the helicopters, away from everything else. And it takes a fairly special person to be able to get to those places and then be able to convey those places in the photographic medium and then produce a book. It really is a labour of love that you have shown for Tasmania. And so thank you very much, and congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah,
well
I
done,
really
yes.
appreciate your words. I really appreciate it. I mean, it's I feel extraordinarily privileged on all counts. It's it's an unspeakable privilege to be able to have spent the time that I have in the wilderness, and to have the opportunity to express some of it in this book has been a great privilege too. I'm very happy with the way the book has come together. I feel it's done some justice to my vision and Linda's vision. So I hope others enjoy it as much.
I'm sure they will. Martin, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining us. I guess we will be back in a couple of weeks, we think. Still a little bit of sorting out whether we're back for our regular schedule in 2 weeks' time, but we'll let you know. And on that note, goodbye, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks for
joining
us. Luke and Nick.